My parents said discipline made me strong. Hospital records say I have cancer. The oncologist's words hung in the air like smoke I couldn't wave away. Stage 3 lymphoma. 18 months, maybe longer, of systematic cell destruction happening inside my body while my parents told me to stop being weak. Doctor. Patel slid a manila folder across her desk, and I watched my shaking hands that had trembled for months, hands I'd been punished for not controlling, reach for documentation that would unravel everything I'd been taught to believe about myself. The fatigue you've been experiencing, she said, her voice careful and clinical. The night sweats, the weight loss, the bone pain. These aren't character flaws, Nathan. This is cancer. She pointed to a series of scans, bright white masses clustered around my chest and neck like malignant constellations. Based on the progression we're seeing, I'd estimate you've had symptoms for at least 8 to 10 months, possibly longer. Her dark eyes met mine with something between compassion and barely concealed anger. When did you first try to tell someone you weren't feeling well? I'd been living in what my parents called structured discipline for 19 years when the truth started killing me from the inside out. Our house on Maple Ridge Drive looked normal enough from the outside. White colonial manicured lawn, basketball hoop over the garage that I was too tired to use anymore. Inside was a different architecture entirely, one built on the principle that weakness was a choice and suffering was character development. My father, Richard, ran his household like a military operation despite never having served. My mother, Diane, enforced his philosophies with religious conviction. They believed that modern parenting had gone soft, that children needed hardship to become strong, that discomfort was the forge where real men were made. I was their proudest experiment in human resilience, right up until the moment a blood test revealed I was actually just dying. The symptoms started small, easy to dismiss. Last autumn, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my sheets soaked through like I'd been swimming. "You're out of shape," my father said when I mentioned it at breakfast one Wednesday morning. "Your body's weak from too much sitting, too much screen time. Add another mile to your morning run." So I did. I ran through the fatigue that made my legs feel like they were filled with concrete. I ran through the breathlessness that turned my lungs into shredded paper. I ran until I collapsed in the driveway one Saturday morning in November, and my father stood over me with his arms crossed, shaking his head. "Pathetic," he said. "When I was your age, I could run 10 miles before breakfast. Get up. Winners don't quit." I got up. I always got up. That was the whole point of their discipline, to create someone who would never surrender, never complain, never acknowledge pain as anything more than a temporary obstacle. They'd been training me since childhood. Cold showers to build mental toughness. Fasting days to teach self-control. Hours of silence as punishment for showing emotion. "The world doesn't care about your feelings," my mother would say, her voice flat and absolute. "It only cares about what you can endure." So when the lymph nodes in my neck started swelling, hard little marbles under my skin, I told myself it was nothing. When I started losing weight despite eating the same carefully measured portions they served me, I convinced myself I was finally getting lean, finally achieving the disciplined body they'd always demanded. When the pain started, deep, grinding ache in my bones that made it hard to sleep, hard to think, hard to exist, I assumed it was just weakness leaving my body, another test to overcome through sheer force of will. By Christmas, I couldn't hide it anymore. I'd lost 23 pounds. My collarbones jutted out like coat hangers under my skin. The swelling in my neck had progressed until it looked like I had golf balls embedded under my jaw. I approached my mother on a Friday afternoon, not a forbidden day. I'd learned their rules well, while she was folding laundry with mechanical precision. "Mom," I said, my voice hoarse from the pressure the swollen nodes put on my throat, "I think something might actually be wrong. These lumps in my neck, they're getting bigger and I feel—" She cut me off with a look sharp enough to draw blood. "You feel what exactly? Tired? Uncomfortable? Do you know what people in real hardship feel like, Nathan? Do you know what your grandfather endured in his life? He worked in coal mines from age 14. He lost 2 fingers in an industrial accident and went back to work the next week. And you want me to worry because you have some swollen glands and you're tired?" She snapped a towel with military precision, creasing it into perfect thirds. "You're 19 years old. You're in college. You have every advantage we never had. And you want sympathy for basic discomfort? This is exactly the weakness we've been trying to eliminate. Mind over matter. You feel sick because you've convinced yourself you're sick. Change your mental state and your physical state will follow." I wanted to argue. God, I wanted to scream. But 19 years of conditioning had welded my mouth shut. So I nodded. I went back to my room. I studied for my engineering finals with a fever that made the words on the page swim and merge. I took my exams while my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pencil. I came home for winter break and collapsed in the hallway, and my father stepped over me on his way to his office, saying only, "Drama doesn't work in this house, son. Get yourself together." The breaking point came on a Thursday in early January. I woke up at 3 a.m, unable to breathe. Not the shallow breathlessness I'd been experiencing for months, but actual suffocation, my airway closing as the swollen lymph nodes compressed my trachea. I stumbled into the bathroom, gasping, trying to force air into lungs that seemed to have forgotten how to expand. In the mirror, Illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light, I looked like a stranger, gaunt, gray-skinned, with eyes sunken so deep they looked like caves. The lumps in my neck had grown to the size of eggs. I could see them moving when I swallowed, shifting under skin stretched thin as paper. I made it to my parents' bedroom door, knocked, waited, knocked again, harder. My father opened the door in his pajamas, looking more annoyed than concerned. "This better be an emergency," he said. "I can't breathe," I managed to whisper. "Something's really wrong. Please, I need to go to the hospital." He looked at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he sighed, a sound full of disappointment and disgust. "You're having a panic attack. It's psychological, not physical. You've worked yourself into this state because you don't have the mental discipline to handle stress. Go back to bed. Practice the breathing exercises we taught you. If you're still feeling dramatic in the morning, we'll discuss your inability to regulate your emotions like an adult." He started to close the door, then paused. "And Nathan? This manipulation tactic, playing sick to get attention, it's beneath you. We raised you better than this." The door clicked shut. I stood in the hallway, fighting for each breath, and something inside me finally cracked. Not my resolve, not my conditioning, something deeper. The fundamental belief that my parents knew what was best, that their cruelty was actually love in disguise, that I deserved everything they put me through. I made it back to my room, grabbed my phone with trembling hands, and did something I'd never done before. I called for help. My roommate from college, Jeremy Liu, answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Nathan? Dude, it's 3 a.m. I need you to come get me," I said, each word a struggle. "I need to go to the emergency room. My parents won't take me. Please, I can't breathe." There was a pause, then I heard rustling, the sound of him getting out of bed. "I'm 40 minutes away. Can you make it outside? To the end of your driveway?" "I think so." "Then get there. I'm leaving now. If you pass out, I'm calling an ambulance, okay? But I'm coming." I packed nothing. Just put on shoes, grabbed my wallet and insurance card, and walked out of the house where I'd spent 19 years learning that my pain didn't matter. The January air was sharp enough to cut, and each breath felt like inhaling broken glass, but I made it to the end of the driveway. I sat on the cold concrete and waited, watching my childhood home with its dark windows and perfect facade, and wondered how long they'd let me die before admitting something might actually be wrong. Jeremy's car pulled up 33 minutes later. He took one look at me in the streetlight and said, "Jesus Christ, Nathan. You look like you've been dead for a week." He helped me into the passenger seat, his hands gentle in a way that made my throat tight with something other than swelling. "How long have you been like this?" "Months," I admitted. "Maybe longer. I don't know anymore. Time's gotten weird." He drove faster than he should have, ran a red light, pulled into the emergency room bay at Riverside Medical Center with a screech of tires. A triage nurse took one look at me and called for immediate assessment. Within minutes, I was in a bed with an oxygen mask and an IV, and a doctor was palpating the masses in my neck with careful professional concern. "Dr. Christina Levinson," her name tag said. "Emergency medicine. 15 years of practice at Riverside, according to the certificates on the wall behind her." "These are significantly enlarged lymph nodes," she said, her fingers tracing the contours of the swelling with clinical precision. "Combined with your presenting symptoms, fever, night sweats, unintentional weight loss, fatigue, dyspnea, we need to rule out lymphoma. I'm ordering a chest x-ray, complete blood count, comprehensive metabolic panel, and a CT scan of your neck and chest. We're also going to need a biopsy of these nodes." She looked at me directly, her green eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "How long have you had these symptoms, and why haven't you sought medical attention before now?" The question opened a door I'd kept locked for 19 years. "My parents," I said, my voice muffled by the oxygen mask. "They don't believe in... They think it's weakness. They think I'm making myself sick by believing I'm sick. They wouldn't bring me." "Doctor," Levinson's expression shifted into something harder. "You're 19. You're legally an adult. You can make your own medical decisions." She paused. "Have they been preventing you from seeking care?" "Not preventing exactly. More like convincing me I didn't need it, that I was being weak, that real strength meant pushing through." She made a note in my chart, and I saw her jaw tighten. "We'll deal with that later. Right now, let's figure out what's actually happening to your body." The tests came back over the next 6 hours. Each result was worse than the last. Severely elevated white blood cell count, anemia, abnormal lymphocytes. The chest x-ray showed a mediastinal mass the size of a grapefruit pressing against my heart and lungs. The CT scan revealed extensive lymphadenopathy throughout my chest, neck, and abdomen. Dr. Levinson called in an oncologist for consultation, and that's how I met Dr. Anjali Patel at 7:30 on a Thursday morning, sitting in a hospital bed while my parents presumably slept soundly in their perfect house, unaware their son was being diagnosed with cancer. Dr. Patel was a small woman with steel in her spine and compassion in her eyes. She'd been practicing oncology for 12 years, had trained at Johns Hopkins, and spoke with the kind of authority that made you believe every word. She sat down beside my bed and opened a laptop, pulling up my scans with practiced efficiency. Nathan, she said, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. What we're seeing on your imaging is consistent with lymphoma, most likely Hodgkin's lymphoma based on the pattern and your age. The biopsy will confirm the specific type, but we need to start treatment quickly. The mass in your chest is compressing your airway and major blood vessels. If we'd waited another week, another few days even, we might be having a very different conversation. You mean I could have died? I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, the superior vena cava syndrome we're seeing, the tracheal compression. These are life-threatening complications. You came in just in time. She paused, studying my face. Dr. Levinson mentioned your parents discouraged you from seeking medical care. Can you tell me more about that? And so I did. Sitting in that hospital bed with monitors beeping and an IV dripping unfamiliar chemicals into my veins, I told a stranger the truth I'd never been allowed to speak at home. I told her about the cold showers and the forced fasts, about being punished for crying when I broke my arm at age 7, how my father made me wait 3 days before taking me to get it set, because real men don't run to doctors for every little ache. I told her about the philosophy of discipline as salvation, weakness as sin, and suffering as the only valid teacher. I told her about waking up soaked in sweat, losing weight, feeling bones grind against each other, and being told it was all in my head, that I was creating my own misery through mental weakness, that I needed to be stronger. Dr. Patel listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, she closed her laptop and looked at me with an intensity that made me want to look away. Nathan, what you're describing isn't discipline. It's medical neglect. It's abuse. And it nearly killed you. She pulled out her phone. I need to make some calls. With your permission, I'd like to involve social services and potentially legal counsel. What your parents did, preventing you from seeking necessary medical care, convincing you that serious symptoms were character flaws, that's not just morally wrong. In many cases, it's criminal. They're my parents, I said weakly, the old conditioning rising up even as my body betrayed every lesson they'd taught me. They thought they were helping. They believe in their philosophy. They're not bad people. They let you develop stage 3 cancer, doctor. Patel interrupted, her voice sharp as a scalpel. They let tumors grow in your chest until you couldn't breathe. They told you that suffering was weakness when suffering was your body screaming for help. I don't care what they believe. I care that you're alive, and you almost weren't. She stood up, and I saw her hands were shaking slightly, the only sign of the anger she was clearly containing. I'm calling someone. You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to. But I'm mandated to report this, and frankly, even if I weren't, I would anyway. The biopsy confirmed Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 3B, with B symptoms: the fever, the drenching night sweats, the weight loss that my parents had attributed to lack of discipline. The treatment plan was aggressive: 6 months of chemotherapy, possibly radiation depending on how the tumors responded. Dr. Patel sat down with me again that afternoon, this time with a social worker named Rebecca Ortiz and a patient advocate named Michael Brennan, and laid out what came next. Not just medically, but legally and practically. Your insurance will cover most of the treatment, Ms. Ortiz explained, her tablet open to a spreadsheet of resources. But there are gaps, and you'll need support during chemotherapy. Do you have family who can help? Besides your parents, I mean. I thought of my aunt, my father's sister, who'd been excommunicated from family gatherings years ago for being too emotional and enabling weakness. My Aunt Catherine, I said, but my parents cut her off. I haven't seen her in 5 years. Do you have her contact information? No, but she lives in the city, I think. Catherine Bloom. She's a therapist. Ms. Ortiz made a note. I'll try to locate her. In the meantime, we need to discuss your living situation. Going back to your parents' house during chemotherapy isn't advisable, both from a medical standpoint. You'll be immunocompromised and need a supportive environment, and from a protective standpoint. They've demonstrated a pattern of medical neglect that could continue. I can stay with Jeremy, I offered. My roommate. He drove me here. That's a start, but we're also going to need to address the bigger issue. She glanced at Michael Brennan, who nodded and took over. Nathan, I work with patients who've experienced medical abuse or neglect. What happened to you fits a clear pattern. Your parents' beliefs, however sincerely held, resulted in you receiving dangerously delayed medical care for a life-threatening condition. There are legal remedies for this. You could file a civil suit for medical neglect. You could seek a restraining order to prevent them from interfering with your treatment. You could, and I know this is difficult to consider, cooperate with a criminal investigation if the district attorney's office decides to pursue charges. My head spun. An hour ago, I'd been their son, their experiment in human resilience. Now I was a victim. A case. Evidence of abuse. I don't know if I can do that, I whispered. They're my parents. They raised me. They gave me everything. Except medical care when you were dying, Michael said gently. I'm not going to push you into anything you're not ready for. But I want you to understand that what happened to you wasn't normal. It wasn't okay, and you have options. They left me alone to process, which was a mistake because being alone meant the old thoughts crept back in. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe I'd failed some test of endurance and this whole medical emergency was just proof of my weakness. Maybe the cancer was psychosomatic, my body manifesting the weakness my mind couldn't overcome. Maybe... My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Where are you? You weren't in your room this morning. We have family obligations this weekend. Don't disappoint us with more of your drama." I stared at the message. Family obligations. I was in a hospital bed with cancer, and she was worried about family obligations. I typed back with shaking hands. "I'm at Riverside Medical Center. I have lymphoma, stage 3. I almost died because you wouldn't let me see a doctor." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "Don't be ridiculous. You're not sick. You're having a mental breakdown because you can't handle normal stress. We're coming to get you." "No," I typed. "I'm an adult. I'm staying here. I'm getting treatment." The response came fast and vicious. "You're being manipulated by doctors who want to make money off unnecessary treatments. You've always been susceptible to manipulation because you're weak-minded. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Be ready to leave." I showed the texts to Dr. Patel when she came back to check on me. She read them, her lips pressed into a thin line, then made a phone call. "Security? This is Dr. Patel in oncology. I have a patient, Nathan Bloom, 19 years old. His parents are on their way here and are likely to attempt to remove him from the hospital against medical advice and his own wishes. He's in serious condition with a life-threatening illness and cannot be discharged at this time. I need someone stationed outside his room, and I need them barred from entry to this unit. Yes, I'll send you photos for identification. Thank you." She hung up and looked at me. "You don't have to see them if you don't want to. You're an adult, you're my patient, and I have a medical and ethical obligation to protect you from anyone who might interfere with your treatment. That includes your parents." They arrived 18 minutes later. I heard my father's voice first, booming through the corridor like thunder. "Where is my son? You have no right to keep him here against his will. This is kidnapping. This is medical malpractice. I'll have your licenses. I'll sue this entire hospital." A security guard's voice, calm and firm. "Sir, your son is an adult and has declined to see you. You need to leave this unit immediately. He's confused. He's been brainwashed. You people have convinced him he's sick when he's just mentally weak. This is exactly what's wrong with modern medicine. You create illness where none exists to justify your inflated salaries." My mother's voice joined in, higher pitched, but equally furious. "Our son has always been dramatic. He's attention-seeking. He's making this up because he failed at college and wants an excuse. We know him better than you do. We've raised him for 19 years. He doesn't have cancer. He has a discipline problem." Doctor. Patel appeared in my doorway, her face carved from stone. She stepped into the hallway, and I heard her voice, sharp and unyielding. "Mr. and Mrs. Bloom, I'm Dr. Anjali Patel, your son's oncologist. Nathan does have cancer. Stage 3, Hodgkin's lymphoma. The biopsy is confirmed. The scans are unequivocal. He has tumors the size of oranges in his chest. When he came into the emergency room this morning, his airway was being compressed to the point of asphyxiation. If he'd waited another few days to seek treatment, he would have died. This isn't drama. This isn't weakness. This is cancer, and it's serious, and it requires immediate treatment." There was a beat of silence. Then my father. "I don't believe you. I want to see these so-called scans. I want a second opinion. What you want is irrelevant, doctor." Patel cut him off. "Nathan is an adult. He's my patient. He's requested that you not be allowed access to his room or his medical information. I'm honoring that request. You need to leave. Now." "This is insane," my mother said, and I could hear tears in her voice, real tears, or tactical ones. I couldn't tell anymore. "Nathan, please. We love you. We're trying to protect you from people who want to pump you full of poison and convince you you're sick. Please, baby, just come home. We'll work through this together as a family." I closed my eyes. The old programming told me to obey, to trust, to go home. But the new knowledge, the scans, the biopsy, the medical evidence that my suffering had been real all along, formed a wall between me and that old self. I pressed the call button. A nurse appeared. "Please tell them I'm not coming home," I said. "Tell them I'm getting treatment. Tell them not to contact me." The nurse nodded and left. I heard muffled conversation, raised voices, my mother sobbing. Then silence. Then footsteps receding down the corridor. They were gone. I started chemotherapy 3 days later. The first infusion was brutal. 6 hours in a chair with poison dripping into my veins, killing the cancer cells, but also killing healthy cells, leaving me nauseous and shaking and bald within 2 weeks. Jeremy brought me things from our apartment. Aunt Catherine, who Ms. Ortiz had tracked down, showed up on day 4 with tears streaming down her face and pulled me into a hug that made my bones ache, but my heart feel less shattered. "I tried," she whispered. "When you were little, I tried to tell them they were too hard on you. They cut me out. I should have fought harder. I'm so sorry." She became my advocate, my support system, the parent I'd needed all along. She coordinated with the hospital, dealt with insurance, researched treatment options, and sat with me through the worst of the chemotherapy side effects. She also hired a lawyer. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. Attorney David Frost had handled medical neglect cases for 15 years. He sat in my hospital room one afternoon in February, his briefcase open and his expression grim as I told him everything. He recorded the conversation with my permission, asked clarifying questions, took notes in precise handwriting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Nathan, you have grounds for both a civil suit and potentially criminal charges. Medical neglect of a dependent is a serious crime. You weren't technically a dependent anymore at 19, but the pattern of control and the severity of the neglect make this prosecutable. The question is, what do you want? I thought about it. About my parents, who'd raised me to be strong by making me weak, who'd loved me in their broken way by breaking me further, who'd believed so deeply in their philosophy that they'd nearly sacrificed me to it. I want them to understand, I said finally. I want them to admit that what they did was wrong. I want them to see the scans, read the medical reports, hear from the doctors that I wasn't making it up. I wasn't weak. I was sick. That's the hardest thing to get, David warned. True understanding, genuine remorse, those aren't things courts can mandate, but we can get accountability. We can get a judgment that says what they did was negligent. We can potentially get financial compensation for your medical bills and suffering. Would that be enough? I don't know, I admitted, but it's something. He filed the lawsuit in March. Medical neglect, intentional infliction of emotional distress, loss of consortium. The complaint laid out in legal language what my body had already testified to. Months of ignored symptoms, dismissed pain, dangerous delay in diagnosis. We attached medical records, expert statements from Dr. Patel and Dr. Levinson, photographs of the tumors on scans, documentation of the stage and severity of the cancer. We included the text messages, the conversations with hospital staff, my own written account of years of systematic conditioning that had taught me to ignore my body's distress signals. My parents responded through their own attorney, a man named Gregory Whitmore, who specialized in defending parents accused of abuse. Their answer to the complaint was a masterpiece of deflection. They'd always acted in what they believed was Nathan's best interest. They'd raised him according to their sincerely held beliefs about character development. They couldn't have known he was seriously ill because he'd never adequately communicated his symptoms. They'd offered to take him to a doctor multiple times, but he'd refused. The night he left for the hospital, they'd been sleeping and hadn't known he was in distress. It was all lies, calculated, careful lies designed to rewrite history in their favor. But it was also strategic. They knew that proving medical neglect required showing they'd been aware of serious symptoms and had deliberately denied care. If they could claim ignorance, claim I'd hidden my illness, they might escape liability. David Frost was ready for this. That's why we have the medical evidence, he explained. The tumors didn't grow overnight. The symptoms didn't appear yesterday. We have documented evidence of progressive, worsening symptoms over many months. We have your testimony about reporting those symptoms. We have the text messages showing their response when you told them you were in the hospital with cancer. This isn't a he said, she said situation. This is medical evidence versus convenient amnesia. The case moved slowly through the system while my body moved through chemotherapy. I lost my hair, my strength, my appetite. I gained a port in my chest for easier infusions, mouth sores that made eating agony, and a level of exhaustion I'd never imagined possible. But I also gained something else: clarity. Each round of chemotherapy was proof that the cancer was real. Each scan showing shrinking tumors was evidence that I'd needed treatment. Each side effect was validation that my suffering had never been a choice. My parents tried to reach out multiple times: letters to Aunt Catherine's house where I was staying, emails to my college account, messages through distant relatives. Each communication followed the same pattern: concern masquerading as love, guilt disguised as worry. We miss you. We're praying for you. We just want you to come home. Never an admission of wrongdoing, never an apology, never acknowledgement that they'd been catastrophically, dangerously wrong. I didn't respond. The depositions happened in May. I sat across a conference table from my parents for the first time since I'd left their house in January. They looked smaller somehow, diminished. My father's jaw was set in the stubborn line I knew so well. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, whether from genuine tears or strategic crying, I couldn't tell. Gregory Whitmore led their depositions, trying to establish a narrative of devoted parents and a troubled child. Isn't it true, he asked my father, that Nathan had a history of anxiety and attention-seeking behavior? Yes, my father said without hesitation. Since childhood, he was always dramatic, always looking for sympathy, always trying to get out of responsibilities by claiming he was tired or sick or hurt. And when he complained of being tired this past fall, you interpreted that through the lens of this established pattern? Of course. He'd been doing the same thing for years. We thought we were helping him build resilience by not indulging the behavior. You had no reason to believe he was seriously ill? None whatsoever. He looked fine. He was functioning. He was attending college. If someone is really sick, really in crisis, you can tell. David Frost took over for cross-examination. He pulled out photographs of me from January, taken when I'd first been admitted to the hospital. Gaunt, gray, with visible lumps distorting my neck. Does this look fine to you, Mr. Bloom? My father barely glanced at the photos. That's after months of him believing himself into illness. The mind is powerful. If you convince yourself you're sick. Did the mind create the tumors in his chest? David interrupted, pulling out the CT scans. Did the mind create these masses pressing on his heart and lungs? Did the mind manufacture cancer cells that show up on a biopsy? I'm not a doctor. I can't interpret those images. Then let me help you. This, David pointed to the largest mass, is a tumor the size of a grapefruit. It was compressing your son's superior vena cava and his trachea. When he came to the emergency room, he was in respiratory distress. If he'd waited another week, he would have died. Not from believing he was sick, from actually being sick, from having cancer that you refused to acknowledge. My father's face reddened. We didn't refuse anything. He never told us it was serious. Really? David pulled out printed text messages. Let's review. Here's a text from Nathan in November saying he'd found lumps in his neck and asking if he should see a doctor. Your response? Stop touching yourself and obsessing. You're creating problems where none exist. Here's another from December. I've lost 15 pounds and I'm exhausted all the time. Something's wrong. Your response? Good. You needed to lose weight. Exercise more if you're tired. And here, my favorite, from January 2nd, less than a week before he collapsed. I can barely breathe. The lumps are getting bigger. I'm scared. Your response? Fear is a choice. Discipline your mind. The conference room was silent. My mother was crying quietly, her hands pressed to her face. My father stared at the table, his jaw working but no words coming out. You knew, David said softly. You knew he was suffering. You knew he was asking for help. You just didn't believe him. And that nearly killed him. When it was my turn to be deposed, Gregory Whitmore tried to paint me as estranged and resentful, looking for financial gain by exaggerating my parents' strictness. Isn't it true you'd been planning to move out and cut contact with your parents even before your diagnosis? No, I said. I'd been trying to be the son they wanted, the strong, disciplined, unbreakable son. I'd been trying so hard that I ignored my own body shutting down because they'd taught me that listening to my body was weakness. You've characterized your upbringing as abusive, but didn't your parents provide for you? Didn't they give you food, shelter, education? They gave me everything except permission to be sick. Everything except the right to suffer without shame. Everything except medical care when I was dying. That's dramatic language, Mr. Bloom. It's accurate language. According to Dr. Patel, if I'd waited another 10 days to seek treatment, the tumors would have completely occluded my airway. I would have asphyxiated. That's not drama. That's medical fact. The trial was set for September, but it never made it that far. In August, with my chemotherapy finally complete and scans showing complete remission, David called with news. They want to settle, he said. Full admission of negligence, public apology, and $250,000 to cover your medical expenses and compensatory damages. What about criminal charges? I asked. The DA's office reviewed the case. They're not pursuing criminal charges because you were technically an adult when most of the neglect occurred, but they've noted it in your parents' file. If they ever have other children or work with children, this will follow them. It wasn't perfect justice. It wasn't my parents on their knees begging forgiveness and truly understanding what they'd done. But it was something. It was official acknowledgement that they'd been wrong. It was money to pay for the years of treatment I'd still need. It was protection for potential future victims. I took the settlement. The public apology was published in the local newspaper and read, Richard and Diane Bloom acknowledge that their parenting philosophy, while well-intentioned, resulted in serious harm to their son Nathan. They failed to recognize the severity of his medical symptoms and delayed his access to necessary care, resulting in a late-stage cancer diagnosis that could have been caught earlier with proper medical attention. They take full responsibility for this failure and hope that their experience will encourage other parents to seek professional medical evaluation for their children's health concerns rather than relying solely on disciplinary approaches to illness. It was corporate speak, carefully worded by lawyers. But it was also the truth, in black and white, admitting what they'd spent my whole life denying. I hadn't been weak. I'd been sick. And they'd been wrong. I never spoke to them again. Not out of anger exactly, though there was plenty of that. But out of a kind of exhausted clarity. They'd loved me the way they knew how, through the broken lens of their philosophy. They'd believed they were forging strength by denying weakness. They'd thought discipline could overcome disease. And when reality proved otherwise, when medical evidence showed that their beliefs had nearly killed me, they still couldn't fully admit it. The apology had been legal strategy, not genuine remorse. Some breaks can't be healed. Some damage goes too deep. I finished my treatment in September. The final scan showed no evidence of disease. Dr. Patel hugged me, something I'd never seen her do with a patient before. You did it, she said. You survived the cancer, and you survived them. That takes a different kind of strength than anything they tried to teach you. Aunt Catherine threw a remission party. Jeremy was there, and Dr. Patel, and Miss Ortiz, and even the security guard who'd barred my parents from my hospital room that first terrible day. We ate cake and laughed, and I felt the weight of 19 years of conditioning start to lift, replaced by something lighter. Not happiness, not yet. But possibility. The possibility of a life where pain was acknowledged, where weakness was okay, where asking for help was strength. I went back to college in January, a full year after my diagnosis. My hair had grown back in dark curls that looked nothing like my old hair. People who'd known me before barely recognized me, not just physically, but in the way I carried myself. Softer, more open, less afraid of being human. Sometimes I still hear my father's voice in my head, telling me that discomfort is temporary, but character is permanent. Sometimes I wake up at 3 a.m. and have to remind myself that the night sweats are from anxiety, not cancer, that I'm allowed to be afraid. Sometimes I catch myself downplaying pain or pushing through exhaustion, and I have to consciously choose to stop, to rest, to ask for help. But I'm alive. I'm healthy. I'm free. And if you'd asked me a year ago which was more important, being strong or being alive, I would have said strong without hesitation, because that's what I'd been taught. Now I know the answer is neither. The answer is being human, with all the weakness and strength and messiness that entails. My parents sent me a birthday card this year. I didn't open it. I put it in a file with the settlement papers and the medical records and all the other documentation of what discipline nearly cost me. Evidence, proof, a reminder that my suffering was never weakness, my illness was never a choice, and my survival was the real strength they'd tried and failed to teach me. The cancer gave me scars, physical ones from the port and the biopsies, emotional ones from the treatment and the fear. But my parents gave me different scars, deeper ones, the kind that come from being taught that love looks like cruelty and care looks like dismissal. I'm healing from both, slowly, imperfectly. But I'm healing. And that's more than I would have gotten if I'd stayed strong the way they wanted me to be. That's more than I would have gotten if I'd kept believing that discipline could cure what was killing me from the inside out. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help. Sometimes weakness is just being human. Sometimes survival means rejecting everything you were taught and choosing yourself instead. I chose myself. I chose life. I chose truth over their version of strength. And if you've made it this far through this story, I hope you'll choose the same if you ever find yourself in a situation where the people who should protect you are the ones causing the harm. I hope you'll choose yourself, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because you deserve to be believed. You deserve to be cared for. You deserve to be alive. And discipline, no matter how well-intentioned, should never cost you that. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.